Before humans wrote a single word, before they planted the first seed of wheat, long before anyone stacked the first mud brick wall into a village, they did something that makes no obvious survival sense at all. They knelt. They closed their eyes and prayed to forces they couldn't see, touch, or hear. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of ritual and religious behavior stretching back somewhere between 45,000 and 200,000 years, deep into the Middle Paleolithic, meaning belief in the supernatural was already active tens of thousands of years before agriculture existed in any form. Nobody taught them to do this. No scripture, no holy book, no shared instruction manual. So why did ancient humans, scattered across a wild and genuinely dangerous planet with zero contact between distant groups, all independently arrive at the same conclusion? That something larger than themselves was watching from somewhere just out of sight? To find the earliest traces of this shift, look at how our ancestors started treating their dead. In the animal kingdom, death is met with almost total indifference. A lion will walk straight past the carcass of its own pride mate without a second glance. A chimpanzee mother might carry her dead infant for a few days out of instinct, but eventually she sets it down and simply moves on. To almost every other animal, a corpse is just organic matter, a shell that stopped being useful. But at some point in our evolutionary history, human corpses stopped being treated like discarded material. They became sacred. That shift represents one of the more significant behavioral departures in the entire history of life on Earth. Burial rituals reveal that humans had started looking at a dead body and recognizing that something essential, something beyond the physical, was now missing. This wasn't simply about hiding a decomposing body from scavengers. It was about a journey. Across archaeological sites worldwide, early graves turn up, packed with grave goods, weapons, intricately carved bone jewelry, stone tools, even traces of food, deliberately buried alongside skeletal remains. If ancient humans genuinely believed death was the absolute end, these burials would represent an enormous, pointless waste of resources. In a world where crafting a single stone hand axe demanded hours of intense labor, burying one in the dirt with a corpse was a real sacrifice. They did it anyway because they believed the deceased still needed those tools, that the dead hadn't ceased to exist, only relocated to some other realm. Grave goods are, essentially, the earliest physical proof we have of belief in an afterlife. The earliest known evidence of this behavior comes from a site called Cima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones, deep inside a cave system at Atapuerca in northern Spain. To even reach it, researchers had to crawl on hands and knees through narrow, mud-slicked passages down to a 13-meter vertical shaft. At the bottom, they found the fossilized remains of more than 28 individuals of Homo heidelbergensis, dating back roughly 400,000 years. Scattered among those ancient bones, archaeologists discovered a single, beautifully crafted hand axe made of rare red quartzite, nicknamed Excalibur, showing absolutely no wear marks at all, no sign it had ever been used for butchery or woodworking. It had been placed there deliberately, as a ritual offering to the dead. Further along the timeline, at Kafsa Cave in Israel, researchers found 90,000 years old human skeletons buried alongside red ochre and marine shells. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, Neanderthals were buried on beds of wildflowers. If these ancient humans didn't believe in something beyond death, why bury weapons, ornaments, and flowers with bodies that would never breathe again? To see just how deep these ritual roots actually go, look beyond our own species entirely, to the Neanderthals. In 2016, researchers exploring Bruniquel Cave in southwestern France made a staggering find more than 300 meters underground, far past any reach of natural light. Complex circular structures built from nearly 400 deliberately broken stalagmites, arranged in concentric rings and dated to approximately 176,000 years ago, long before modern Homo sapiens ever set foot in Europe. Building these required Neanderthals to carry fire deep underground just to see their own work, and researchers found burnt bone fragments inside the circles themselves, strongly suggesting a symbolic or ritual purpose rather than anything practical. Ritualized gatherings deep inside caves, it turns out, weren't unique to modern humans at all. They were a shared cognitive inheritance stretching back hundreds of thousands of years, present in a completely separate human lineage. This raises an obvious question. Is the human brain simply hardwired to believe in gods? Evolutionary anthropologists have proposed something called the two-stage theory to explain exactly this. The idea is that our ancestors first evolved specific mental tools genuinely useful for physical survival and reproduction. And then, in a second stage, those same survival tools accidentally misfired, generating a natural tendency to believe in spirits, ghosts, and deities as an unintended side effect. In this view, religious belief isn't a direct adaptation in itself. It's an evolutionary byproduct of cognitive machinery originally built to keep us from getting eaten on the savannah. One of the core tools behind this is theory of mind, the cognitive ability to attribute beliefs, desires, and intentions to other people, which let early humans navigate complex social relationships by guessing what a neighbor was actually thinking. The problem is, this system ran so aggressively that it started projecting intention onto things that weren't alive at all. Rain wasn't understood as water condensing out of the atmosphere. Ancient humans assumed it fell with purpose, because the sky wanted to water the earth. A volcanic eruption wasn't geology. The mountain was angry. Wind howling through trees wasn't airflow. It was a spirit expressing grief. Every shadow, every storm, every shift in weather got processed as the intentional action of some conscious mind behind it. This cognitive overreach is the foundation of animism, likely the oldest form of human religion. The belief that spirits inhabited the sun, the wind, the rivers, the trees, everything. And because these forces were believed to have conscious minds of their own, ancient humans concluded they had to be dealt with the same way you deal with another person, through gifts, respect, and negotiation. Want a neighbor's help? Bring a gift? Speak kindly. Want the rain spirit to water your crops? Perform a ritual, make an offering, show respect. Worship began, essentially, as a pragmatic survival strategy, a way of turning a cold, chaotic, unpredictable universe into a giant web of relationships ancient humans could actually negotiate with. This evolutionary wiring is so powerful, it still dominates the modern, scientifically literate world. Today, roughly 6 billion people, about 84% of the global population, identify with a formal religion. Even in heavily secularized societies, supernatural belief doesn't simply vanish. Surveys show that even among people who self-identify as atheists, roughly 1 in 5 still believes in some higher power, cosmic force, or spiritual energy. We've built particle accelerators. We've sent probes to the edge of the solar system. And the overwhelming majority of our species still senses, deep down, that there's some conscious intention behind the universe. Our brains, in a very real sense, are still running the original default program. But belief in gods didn't just help ancient humans make sense of the natural world. It solved a genuinely massive social problem. As human groups grew larger, keeping order became dramatically harder. In a small band of around 30 hunter-gatherers, everyone knew everyone personally. Steal meat, lie, or dodge your share of the hunt, and the rest of the group would punish you almost immediately through gossip, mockery, or outright banishment. But as communities expanded and people increasingly had to deal with strangers, that direct face-to-face accountability broke down, and the incentive to cheat, steal, and act purely selfishly shot upward. A dynamic researchers call the free rider problem, and one that has quietly destroyed countless human groups throughout history. Religion evolved, in part, to counter exactly this, by extending social surveillance beyond what any human eye could actually see, adding all-seeing spirits, watchful ancestors, and moralizing deities into the mix. Steal from a neighbor when no one's around, and you might dodge human justice. But you couldn't hide from the gods, who might strike you with disease, ruin your harvest, or punish your children. That shared belief functioned as a kind of psychological police force, pushing individuals toward honest, cooperative behavior, even in complete isolation. The idea of a divine eye watching from above became the ultimate social glue, and that psychological surveillance handed religious groups a genuine evolutionary edge. A tribe that genuinely believed in an all-seeing deity cooperated far more effectively than one that didn't, sharing food more reliably, fighting together more courageously, and building sturdier, more resilient communities. In the brutal competition of prehistoric survival, cooperative groups would simply outcompete and eventually replace selfish ones. The adaptive value of early religion was never really about individual souls. At its origin, belief in gods was practical social technology, purpose-built to keep a tribe from splintering apart under its own weight. The groups that survived tended to be the ones that feared their gods. For decades, the standard historical narrative was tidy and simple. Humans invented agriculture first, which let them settle into permanent villages and generate a food surplus. That surplus supported specialists like priests, which eventually produced organized religion and temple building. Religion, in this telling, was a luxury item purchased with agricultural wealth. In 1994, a discovery in southeastern Turkey shattered that entire timeline. Göbekli Tepe is a massive stone temple complex dating back roughly 11,500 years, constructed around 9,500 BCE. Dozens of T-shaped limestone pillars, some standing 5 meters tall and weighing between 10 and 20 tons, arranged in precise concentric circles and elaborately carved with reliefs of predatory animals, snarling lions, wild boars, scorpions, venomous snakes. What makes the site genuinely mind-bending is that it was built entirely by pre-agricultural hunter-gatherers who dragged these enormous stones from nearby quarries with no metal tools, no wheels, no riding, and no domesticated animals to help haul them. They didn't even have permanent houses. These were nomadic bands who joined forces, for months at a time, purely for a massive shared ritual purpose. Before Göbekli Tepe was excavated, the idea that nomadic hunter-gatherers could organize monumental stone architecture on this scale was considered essentially impossible. And yet the oldest layer at the site shows no evidence of domestic life whatsoever. No hearths, no trash pits, no permanent living quarters. The structures were purely ceremonial. Houses, domestic tools, and agricultural remains only appear in much later, shallower layers built on top of the original ritual complex. The physical evidence is stark. Ancient humans gathered in large numbers to perform religious ritual long before they ever built a town or planted a single crop deliberately. This flips the traditional arrow of causation completely. It wasn't agriculture that produced religion. It was religion, or at least the demands of coordinated ritual gathering, that appears to have forced the birth of agriculture. Constructing something on the scale of Göbekli Tepe required hundreds of people, drawn from separate nomadic bands, working together for months at a stretch. Feeding that many gathered workers using only wild game and foraged berries was simply an impossible logistical challenge. To sustain the construction effort and complete their rituals, they needed something far more reliable. Genetic mapping of wild einkorn wheat has traced its closest living wild relative to the slopes of the Karakada Mountains, just 30 kilometers from Göbekli Tepe itself. The need to feed the temple builders appears to have directly driven the domestication of wheat, planting wild grain systematically, purely to keep the monument building going. And Göbekli Tepe wasn't an isolated anomaly. In 2021, Turkish authorities and international archaeologists launched a coordinated project excavating a dozen contemporary Neolithic sites across the same broader region. Among them, Karahantepe, roughly 63 kilometers away, is essentially a sister site, featuring similar T-shaped pillars, but with a key difference. Many of its structures are carved directly into the natural limestone bedrock, and crucially, it shows clearer evidence of actual residential areas alongside its monumental ritual spaces. Southeastern Turkey, it turns out, was home to an extensive, interconnected regional network of ritual centers. Proof that pre-agricultural humans weren't isolated, wandering bands at all, but part of a much larger, culturally unified society sharing a common symbolic worldview. This leaves researchers with a genuinely open debate. Was religion a biological byproduct, or a direct evolutionary adaptation in its own right? The byproduct model argues religious belief is simply a side effect of cognitive systems built for other jobs entirely, reading faces, detecting predators, with our brains prone to a kind of evolutionary glitch that makes us see spirits and intention in the wind. The adaptation model argues instead that religion was actively selected for, precisely because it let human societies scale far beyond what would otherwise be possible. Without a shared mythology binding people together, we'd have had no realistic path from tiny family bands to coordinating strangers across empires. Interestingly, the evolutionary roots of ritual behavior itself might predate our split from other primates entirely. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology have observed wild chimpanzees in West Africa engaging in something called accumulative stone throwing. In Guinea and Guinea-Bissau, chimps repeatedly hurl rocks at specific trees, building up piles of stones at their bases. There's no clear survival or food-related reason for this behavior at all. Interestingly, the chimps specifically favor resonant trees that produce a loud booming sound when struck, one that carries through dense forest. Some primatologists suggest this behavior represents the evolutionary scaffolding of ritual itself. a repetitive, socially learned action marking a specific location as significant, with no functional purpose beyond the marking itself, suggesting the biological groundwork for ritual behavior was already in place millions of years before modern humans existed. Beyond helping societies scale, this cognitive machinery also delivered a genuinely powerful biological placebo effect. Life in the ancient world was saturated with trauma, disease, and sudden, unpredictable death. Without modern medicine, the chronic stress of daily survival alone would have been psychologically devastating. Chronic stress floods the body with cortisol, which damages immune function and measurably raises mortality risk over time. Collective rituals, chanting, and prayer functioned as genuine biological stress relievers. Neuroimaging studies show intense prayer or meditation deactivates the brain's default mode network, reducing anxiety and producing real, measurable feelings of calm. By giving people a framework for making sense of tragedy, belief in gods lowered physiological stress, protected immune function, and, quite literally, helped keep people alive longer. Collective ritual also triggers direct neurochemical shifts. When people take part in synchronized activity, group dancing, chanting, shared prayer, their brains release substantial amounts of endorphins and oxytocin, a chemical combination that lowers social anxiety and increases empathy, temporarily dissolving the usual boundary between self and group. It makes a room full of unrelated strangers feel, briefly, like biological family. This neurochemical bonding let early humans form larger, more cohesive groups capable of building cities, digging large-scale irrigation systems, and defending shared territory together. Once a society adopted a moralizing big god and reinforced belief with costly, demanding rituals, it became, in a competitive sense, nearly unstoppable. To make sure community members weren't simply faking belief in these all-seeing gods, religions developed genuinely costly rituals. Under what's called costly signaling theory, a behavior only functions as a reliable signal of real commitment if it's difficult, painful, or expensive to perform. Anthropologist Richard Sosis studied this directly by analyzing survival rates among historical communes and found that religious communes demanding strict rituals, dietary restrictions, and daily prayer consistently survived far longer than secular ones. Sosis also studied Israeli kibbutzim, finding that religious members who engaged in visible, costly daily prayer behaved significantly more cooperatively in economic games than their secular counterparts. The cost of the ritual itself functions as a barrier to entry, screening out untrustworthy members who might otherwise exploit the group's cooperation. This helps explain why ancient rituals sometimes escalated to genuinely extreme levels of sacrifice. In Carthage, during periods of military siege or environmental crisis, elites reportedly practiced child sacrifice to the god Moloch. Under costly signaling theory, giving up a child represents about the most impossible-to-fake demonstration of loyalty imaginable. By participating in that horrific act, the ruling class was proving, in the starkest possible terms, total commitment to the collective survival of the city. The shared trauma bonded the community together, suppressing internal panic and rebellion at exactly the moment the city was most vulnerable. It's a dark, extreme expression of the same underlying social technology that had been quietly holding earlier, smaller societies together all along. As societies scaled up further, the structure of belief shifted from small-scale, transactional negotiation towards something closer to cosmic warfare. In ancient Persia, the prophet Zoroaster introduced the concept of cosmic dualism, dividing the entire universe into absolute good and absolute evil. The old gods stopped being entities you simply bargained with for rain and became soldiers in an ongoing war between light and darkness. This shift genuinely transformed human morality. Where good behavior had once been about avoiding immediate social shame or a feared lightning strike, actions now carried cosmic significance. You were required to actively choose a side in a struggle that would determine the fate of the entire universe. This dualistic framework was inherited by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in turn, permanently turning personal morality into something closer to a cosmic duty. We still carry the scars of this ancient evolutionary transition today. Even in thoroughly secular modern societies, people constantly search for meaning in purely random events. When tragedy strikes, we still ask what we did to deserve it. When good luck comes our way, we feel grateful. Even when we can't quite say who or what, we're thanking. Our brains are still running the ancient software built for the savannah, still trying to read intention into the storm, still tensing at a creaking floorboard in the dark. We've conquered the wilderness, built cities of glass and steel, and sent rockets to the moon. And yet the underlying program that first created the gods is still running quietly inside us, hyperactive, patient, waiting. Even the most committed modern skeptics still perform rituals without a second thought. We knock on wood to ward off bad luck. We avoid walking under ladders. We make a wish before blowing out birthday candles. We carry lucky charms or insist on wearing a specific jersey while our team plays. Functionally, these habits are nearly identical to the rain dances our ancestors once performed. Small, low-risk attempts to negotiate a bit of control over an unpredictable future. Small bets placed with unseen forces we can't fully name. We might tell ourselves we've outgrown the temples. But the architects who built them, it turns out, are still very much alive inside us. Tens of thousands of years before the first word was ever written down, ancient humans looked up at the night sky and quietly wondered whether anyone was looking back. That question never really went away. Nobody had to teach us to believe in the supernatural. It appears to be the default setting of the human brain, the product of roughly 3 million years of survival pressure and the social architecture that eventually let us build the world we live in today.